Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Good to meet you. I'm so happy that everyone's joining.
Welcome, everyone, to the first public community roundtable on the International Recycling Group's new plastic processing plant. My name is Tiffany, and I'm joined here today with my co-MC and the magic behind the Zoom meeting, Amina. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Amina, just a teen out of Erie that cares about my future, your future, and pretty much just the literal future. And I just really, I'm here because I care about my community and I want us to be healthy and thriving and not put any toxins into the world or the air we live in. Yep.
Amina and I are both teens, and we're super excited to be involved in this and to spread the word about what we know. All right, without further ado, welcome to Friend or Foe. We will be having some speakers talk to us today. Firstly, starting with Makayla, who's going to give a little bit of a rundown and set the screen. Then we have Dell, who is the founder of the Last Beach Cleanup, and she'll be talking to us about economics, as well as Sarah Bennett, who is PennFuture's Erie campaign manager and a clean water advocate. We also have Nijmie, who is the co-chair of Pennsylvania's Poor People's Campaign and is the co-founder and co-coordinator of Put People First for Pennsylvania. And then we'll close again with having Makayla speak as well. All right, Makayla will be joining us first here.
So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Makayla Alicea. I am from Erie County. I'm from Edinburgh, and I'm currently an undergrad student at Allegheny College. I finished my last final of the semester today in constitutional law, and I have one more semester to go before I graduate with a bachelor's, a double major in environmental studies and political science. I'm currently co-founder and the co-chair of the Green New Deal Coalition, and I'm pretty heavily involved in community engagement and organizing. As a young person who has been working multiple jobs to get through college and has the goals to come back to my communities of Erie and Meadville, I want to work to see only development that truly benefits all people, not just a few. My 4 years at Allegheny College have taught me to be an even more critical thinker and effective researcher. So when International Recycling Group's plan was discussed with us, I wanted to work to assure the community was aware and involved and had a stake in the plan. That's why I'm here, to inform, to tell some stories, and to identify patterns to learn from. So how many of you know what plastics is made of? I know I can't see you, but I can see some of you. Okay, well, plastic is made from crude oil, which is drilled from the oceans and natural gas, in the oceans and natural gas that is extracted from rock formations under the ground. These raw materials are processed to create polymers, which form the resin material that plastic is made of. It's no secret that we have an addiction to single-use plastic. From microplastics infiltrating our bodies to giant garbage patches forming in our oceans, this is a problem we need to address. Furthermore, our reliance on plastics supports the continuation of our dependence on the extraction of fossil fuels. The problem with recycling is that it has never been a good solution to the plastic problem. Single stream recycling has created a lot of contamination and trash going into the recycling stream, lowering the quality and value of recyclables. Right now, only 1 in 2 plastic bottles, jugs, and jars are the only plastics able to be recycled in curbside recycling programs. That means that all the other plastics, 3 through 7, including yogurt containers, food containers, plastic cups, and more, are not recyclable. Many plastics are not able to be recycled for several reasons. 1, low quality and durability. 2, lack of markets for lower quality plastics. And 3, the difficulty with sorting. The best ways to reduce our dependence on plastics, especially single-use plastics, are through a few methods. One way is to invest in renewable and refillable infrastructure for products. Another is to extend producer responsibility to require companies to have a higher percentage recycled plastic in their packaging. Another is to implement zero waste strategies that educate and encourage the public to reduce consumption and waste. And another strategy is advanced recycling, which includes chemical recycling, incineration, and plastic to fuel technologies. This solution, however, does not address the problem of our reliance on plastic, but rather is a way to deal with excessive plastic waste without changing our consumption of plastic. The International Recycling Group's proposed development in the city of Erie, we gathered this information all publicly, and we have many of our sources cited here within. So if you're interested in those, you can contact us for sure. But according to these public articles, IRG plans to process 275,000 tons of mixed waste plastic material per year. They say that they will source this from a 750-mile radius to get to this amount. Additionally, the proposed plastics recycling plant would use advanced mechanical sorting technologies to sort 1 and 2 plastics. But IRG would process the plastic scraps into pellets, which would be sold on the open market. IRG says its non-marketable material will be repurposed into its proprietary iron-reducing agent for use in steel manufacturing. So at this facility, they will be shredding this plastic into flakes that will be sent across Lake Erie to Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and be burned as a coke replacement in steel manufacturing. Mitch, the IRG founder and chairman and a former steel executive, says he has been working on bringing together the steel and plastics recycling industries for more than a decade. Prior to forming IRG, the over decade-old group, Hecht was the chief financial officer of International Steel Group. Is this plastic recycling sustainable or not? It's not if there is a lack of publicly available research on the environmental impacts of using plastics as a coke replacement in steel manufacturing, or if it does not fit into the circular economy because it is dependent on the continued extraction of fossil fuels and consumption of plastics. So there's a couple of problems here that we've identified and concerns. And one of the biggest one is a technique called greenwashing, which is intentionally misleading the public. And the central danger in greenwashing is that it can mislead people in acting unsustainably. If a company says they are eco-friendly, you may want to support them. If their environmental claims turn out to be false, then you've accidentally contributed to harming the environment by supporting the company. Throughout this presentation, one of the questions you should think about is IRG greenwashing?
Next, we're going to be hearing from Dell. Jan, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to talk with you today about this proposed project. I'm a chemical engineer, and I have worked around the world for more than 30 years, longer than some of you have been alive by far, working in factories, helping factories, and then try to fix bad factories, really to stop pollution and then to help the communities where factories are. I've worked in really great factories, like I helped Nike get all of their shoe facilities cleaned up so that they didn't make waste. I helped make Barbie better and food products and other things too. So I've worked around the world, and then I retired and took on my passion campaign, which was to stop plastic pollution. And as a part of doing that, I've heard and gotten involved in projects that are getting proposed around plastic waste. And some of them aren't a very good idea, or they have lots of problems. And because of my experience in seeing plants that get built and operated that have problems with the community, I really want to help stop problems before they start. And so on this project in particular, I just want to share with you 4 big problems and a 5th problem that's actually come up with this project, which I think really have to be addressed before anyone would want it in their community. And these are major problems, really flaws with the whole idea. So next slide, please. And the first idea, actually the first problem, which is just a major problem, is that the project may actually be based on illegal trade of waste. There's something called the Basel Amendment, which got agreed by 187 countries last year. 187 countries, including Canada, but not the US, agreed to not ship plastic waste to be burned. That's part of the agreement. 187 countries, the United Nations got together and they agreed this. But this project actually is based on shipping plastic waste from the United States to Canada to be burned in the steelmaking process. And right now, the implementation of this treaty is happening. It's supposed to start January 1st. This whole project was proposed before this law comes into effect. And if Canada follows the law that they agreed to, they should not import this waste. And this is a really big deal. Environmental groups are really fighting this, both from Canada's side as well as the United States side, to make sure that there's no illegal trade. So this is really something to watch moving forward, that it may seem okay today, or based on old laws it was okay to do, but moving forward there could be a law starting January 1st that says you can't do this anymore. So if they were going to build the factory, it would just be stuck there and would be a white elephant, because it couldn't work to send plastic waste to be burned in Canada. Next slide, please. And another big problem is really the economics of what they're talking about doing don't make sense. Plastic waste is worth nothing. Plastics 3 through 7, which are the mixed plastics that they're talking about collecting, nobody wants to buy those. And so when they get the plastic waste in through trucks to this facility, all the good ones, the 1s and 2s, will be taken out back at the cities they came from. Because, when we put plastics in recycling bins, they go to a facility, the facility pulls out the good 1s and 2s and sells those. But the leftover stuff is just trash. And so when they make these pellets, no one's going to want to buy them for anything. Literally the only thing they'll be useful for is burning to make steel. And in fact, 3 similar facilities like this have shut down because the economics are so bad. And this type of facility that they're talking about making doesn't exist anywhere else in the United States, something like this. They say it's a first of its kind. And the reason is it doesn't make economic sense to put $100 million into a plant like this and then not get any profit out of it. So these examples, I'm just going to show you real quick. Next slide, please. This is an example of this facility near where I live in Southern California, in Los Angeles, that had been getting plastic waste from other facilities trucked in from San Francisco all the way down to Los Angeles. And this is what it looks like. This is what the proposed facility looks like. It's really just going to be mountains of plastic waste that they're going to try to sort through and maybe pull out a few leftover 1s and 2s and then have this big mess. They say that they're going to use optical sorting to do all this magically, but there isn't optical sorting that can actually sort through this kind of mess of plastics that ends up getting shipped to them. And you can see that it's not a pretty or sophisticated or nice operation. It's literally just trucks of plastic trash coming into a site. And because the economics were so bad, this facility is now shutting down. Next slide. And here's another one that shut down in Utah. Same thing they were trying to do, get in all this plastic waste, sort it, try to sell it to someone. They couldn't make money. They shut it down. They laid off their employees. Next slide, please. This is a really big issue. What they're talking about of bringing 275,000 tons of plastic from 750 miles. Think about that. I think that's all the way from Atlanta. And then you maybe even bringing in Canadian waste. All these trucks will be pouring into Erie's roads. You know, I'm sure you already have potholes and problems with the roads. I calculated if they're bringing 5,000 tons per year in, and then it gets sorted or made into pellets, then other trucks will have to come pick that up. So when you add all that up and you assume about 15 tons per truck, that's 400 trucks per day if they operate every day of the year. And if they operate about 10 hours a day, that's 40 trucks per hour. Think about that on your roads, on your freeways. I've been around other facilities where this sort of thing happens, and the trucks end up driving the school buses off the road. This is, to me, is just such a big safety hazard for what they're proposing that you all should be really concerned about it, from the accidents that could happen, the congestion, and also the wear and tear on your roads. Next slide. And this keeps me up at night. I track fires at plastic waste facilities. And just this morning, there was another one. It was in England, but I track them globally. There are fires at these facilities so often because the plastics are really, really combustible. On this slide down at the left, I have examples. There's 5 major fires in August of this year alone at very similar kind of facilities, not sortation, but similar plastics recycling facilities. And these are huge fire hazards, and I'm just going to show you a few of them. But this is really a danger to your community. It's a danger to your fire departments. Firefighters get hurt in these fires. When the fires happen, because it's plastic, toxic air emissions are given off, and the communities are always told to shelter in place. And these fires just happen really often, and you should actually expect, if a facility like this went in, a fire will happen. Next slide. Texas, this huge fire raged for hours. Look at the smoke. The community had to shelter in place for hours. It ended up hurting the power lines and other things. We can just click through these, Tiffany, if you're doing it. Next slide. South Carolina. This was a facility, happened 2 weeks later from the other one, and it was owned by the same company. It just shows you they're not putting good safety effort into trying to prevent fires. And the cost is borne by the community. You know, the companies don't pay back the firefighters from coming out there. So this becomes a big cost. Next slide. Indiana, it happened. Next slide. These are all just in 1 month, in August 2020. New Mexico, this just happened. This facility has fires all the time. They admit it. They have fires at least once a year. Next facility. Oh, next slide. West Virginia, this just happened. And this is a facility that's trying to do some sort of advanced recycling, and they're actually proposing a project in New York that the local communities are all fighting against. 2 communities that said, no, we don't want that plant, and they fought it, and now they're going to a third facility, a third community trying to get it in. Next slide. Vancouver has had 2 big fires in this year, October and in June, I think. These are massive fires you can see for like 100 miles away. There's all kinds of videos on the internet. Next slide. And another one in Vancouver. That was like a mile away from the other one. So these are just real impacts on communities. Next slide. And if that wasn't bad enough, the other thing I'm sorry you'd have to worry about if this facility went in is that they're getting all these mixed plastics. And this slide that I show you up in the corner with the buckets and stuff, a lot of plastics are made out of PVC, polyvinyl chloride. Now, the problem with PVC is when it's burned, dioxin air emissions can be created from the chlorine molecule. And it's simply impossible to separate out all of the PVC. I've read statements where IRG says that they're going to separate out all of the PVC, so that won't be a worry. But you can see the sorting lines, the pictures that I'm showing you of what's really going to be happening. PVC is like a part of components, and there's simply no way you can separate it all out. And so and it looks like other types of plastics. So what would happen is when these pellets are made and they're shipped to Canada and they're put in this steel mill, and they're burned at high temperature, then you could get dioxin air emissions, which would end up back in Erie, Pennsylvania. And it's just a really serious health concern. Next slide, please. And so that's the summary that I wanted to give you. These 4 things in particular, besides the fact it actually might not be legal starting January 1st, and NGOs in Canada are really trying to fight the import of plastic waste. The economics are terrible. The truck traffic is really unsafe. The fire hazard blows my mind. It happens every day. And then the dioxin air emissions are something that really would be unavoidable. So with that, I welcome any questions, if we're going to do questions later. And I look forward to working with all of you and collaborating with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan, for that thorough presentation. Next, we will have Sarah Bennett. Sarah is with the organization PennFuture.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Bennett. I am a campaign manager for clean water advocacy at PennFuture here in Erie. We just opened the Erie office this spring. Prior to, and I started with PennFuture this spring as well. Prior to that, I was a faculty member in biology at Mercyhurst for 12 years. I was the biology department chair there for a couple of years, as well as co-director of the environmental science program. And I was also the sustainability officer for the university for a couple of years. So my environmental background comes from teaching, but then also the organization and then working within the Erie community on sustainable initiatives. So PennFuture, for those of you who don't know, because we are relatively new in the Erie area, PennFuture is an environmental advocacy organization dedicated to, and it's statewide, dedicated to protecting clean water and air and promoting sustainable communities for all Pennsylvanians. In this role, since I began this role this spring, I've brought together 12 partner organizations with PennFuture to publish a common agenda for protecting Pennsylvania's Lake Erie watershed. And among the threats that we identified in that common agenda was plastics. So that's why I'm here today to share with you. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I did want to talk about the existing plastic problem that we already have in Erie. And some of this is not unique to Erie, but I think it needs to be acknowledged that we do have this problem already. So first of all, litter is a big problem. If you take a look at this top photo on the right here, we see a big pile of plastic bottles. That is a photo that was taken by one of my colleagues right next to one of our streams. And so those plastic bottles are going to eventually end up in the water. The issue is, I'll talk about the specific issue of unsightliness in just a minute, but what happens is when these larger pieces of plastic get into waterways, they're going to be broken down by that water action, waves and currents, and broken down into microplastics. So they become part of the microplastic soup that is in our lakes and eventually into our oceans. So that's the issue with litter. But in Erie, we also have a large plastic molding industry. And what that means is that we have a regular influx of plastic pellets, also called nurdles, into Erie County. The picture on the bottom right, thanks to Sam Mason, Erie's very own Sam Mason. Thank you, Sam, for providing that. This picture shows a pile of plastic pellets that have directly escaped from a rail car that they're located underneath. So we know that these plastic pellets are escaping during transport, and those pellets are going to easily be transferred, easily be moved by wind and by rain and melting snow directly into our waterways. We know that this is happening. We can find these pellets in our streams. We find these pellets in our lake. We find these pellets washed up on our beaches as well. So we know this is already a problem. So the issue here then is that, first of all, litter is probably our most visual pollutant, and it is unsightly. And people don't want to see plastic, especially when we're out enjoying nature. But added to that is that tourism is a huge industry in Erie County. $1.2 billion a year is what's been calculated that tourism contributes to our economy. Add to that $40 million a year for fishing, and those people are coming from all over the world to come and fish in our streams and in our lake. And so they don't want to come here if they're going to come and have to look at plastic and other litter while they're here. On top of that, and biology is my background, on top of that, when these plastics get into the water and they're there for a long time, they actually absorb persistent organic pollutions like DDT and other persistent organic pollutants. So they absorb these. They also attract bacteria. Bacteria can accumulate on these plastics. So now we have small plastics with toxins attached to them and bacteria that our wildlife like fish and birds are going to mistake for food. So these plastics can serve as a vector of disease-causing bacteria and also toxins into fish and other wildlife. That then, so the problem with these toxins is also that they're going to accumulate in those organisms' tissues. They bioaccumulate, and most of them also biomagnify, meaning they become more concentrated as they move up the food chain. So that's really where you get into the real problems with plastic. It's not just a matter of not wanting to see plastic bottles in the water. Next slide, please. So one of our major concerns, and this was really kind of the first concern that we had when we heard about International Recycling Group opening a facility in Erie, is that the non-recyclable plastics that they plan to ship across Lake Erie to burn in the steelmaking process will be flaked first. So they'll sort these plastics and then flake them. The problem there is that flaked plastic is going to be moved by wind and water even more easily than plastic pellets or other plastic pollution. So once the plastic is flaked, it's going to be transported from the facility somewhere in Erie to our waterfront, and then transferred by barge across the lake to another location, and then transported to a location still on that lake. So there's lots of area for these flakes to escape and get into our water resources. And then another issue that we have with this is that this creates a new path for our plastic waste to go. It perpetuates the reliance on plastic rather than forcing us to reduce the plastic that we're using. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit later. So go ahead, next slide. In addition to the direct issues that we have, the concerns that we have with plastics, we also have some other environmental concerns. Jan brought up earlier the concept of truck traffic. So we do have issues with truck traffic with the abundance of trucks that will be traveling into and out of our community, bringing in this plastic. One of the things that a lot of people are not familiar with is that most of the city of Erie is actually considered are several environmental justice areas by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. I've put these two maps here so you can see the overlay of our opportunity zones. That's the top map here. with environmental justice areas according to the Pennsylvania DEP. So with truck traffic, you're going to have increased air pollution on the ground. You're going to have noise pollution with these trucks traveling 24 hours a day. And those are going to disproportionately impact these environmental justice areas. So I forgot to mention what that environmental justice area means. These are census block groups that are determined to be these EJ areas based on the percentage of people who live in poverty and or the percentage of minorities that live in these areas. And so we're going to see direct impacts to these communities that have already been historically burdened. That's a big problem that we need to consider, especially in a county that has declared racism as a public health crisis. In addition to that, if we zoom out and look at the big picture here, the carbon footprint of this transportation is problematic. So as was already mentioned, the plan is to pull plastic from a 750-mile radius, and then to transport that by barge across the lake as well. That's a big carbon footprint that we're talking about. Kind of moving in the wrong direction if we want to address climate change. And then finally, when the plastic flakes reach their destination across the lake, that plastic is going to be injected into a blast furnace with coke in order to be used in the steelmaking process. This process is going to generate air pollution. The steelmaking process already does generate air pollution. When you add plastics in there, you're going to increase the presence of heavy metals like mercury and cadmium in that air pollution. You also have toxic solid waste that is being generated in the form of ash and slag and other components that's going to have, there's toxins in that waste as well. Next slide, please. So in summary, we really think that the increased reliance on plastic is the wrong direction for Erie. What we need to be doing instead is reducing our plastic use. We all need to use less plastic, and then that will also drive the reduction of plastic production, which relies heavily on fracking, especially in Pennsylvania. We need to promote a circular economy. I believe Makayla already mentioned these things as well. That encourages reuse, that encourages durable goods that can be reused over and over throughout, instead of disposable goods that can be used once and tossed out. And then finally, we need to make sure that in all of our development, we make sure that we protect our natural resources and human health. And the main goal there is to make sure that these resources continue to be assets to us now, as well as assets to our future generations. So with that, I'm going to leave it. It looks like we have a lively discussion happening in the chat. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
I did grow up in southwestern Pennsylvania, in Westmoreland County, in a town called Monessen, and my family was very much impacted by both the pollution, the reality of the steel mills and the industry in that region, and then also the loss of the industry when it went away. And I don't have a presentation, so I'm just going to speak for a few minutes here. I want to thank you for having me. I'm with Put People First Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign in both of those capacities as a volunteer. And in the Poor People's Campaign, we are dealing with the four interconnected evils of poverty, systemic racism, militarism, and environmental devastation, as well as the distorted moral narrative of white supremacist Christian nationalism, which kind of provides a foundation for all the other evils. We're looking at, in Pennsylvania, over 5 million poor and dispossessed people in the state. Nationally, in the Poor People's Campaign, we talk about 140 million people, almost half the country, who are poor or near poor, meaning that we're living at 200% or lower of the federal poverty line and couldn't afford a $400 emergency. Last year, actually, I had the honor of traveling through the northern part of the state with the Poor People's Campaign, which is how I connected with some of you and started to work together through our northern kind of journey through the northern part of Pennsylvania, looking at issues of poverty, systemic racism, environmental devastation, militarism. And I know that Erie has one of the poorest zip codes in the country. And I think that this question of poverty and systemic racism are key to what we're talking about, what you all are talking about here and considering. And I'm not here to weigh in on whether I think that this is a good idea or not. I just want to talk about some of the context from our vantage point and perspective, because we're really talking about it, I think, get oftentimes backed into a corner over this question of jobs. And when we get backed into a corner over the question of jobs, what we're really talking about is how do we meet people's needs and how is society organized or not to meet people's needs. And so I want to give you a question to mull over in your mind as I'm talking, is that what if the working class actually had some control over what was going to happen to meet people's needs? What might we do to meet the community's needs instead of this plant? Because the way that the ruling class builds our allegiance to these kinds of projects is that we have to meet our needs. We don't have a choice. We need housing, we need food, we need healthcare, we need the means to live. We rely on jobs to earn money to meet these needs. So quote unquote job creators in this paradigm are always going to have power over us as they seek to make profits and we seek to merely live. So how might we organize society to meet our needs if we had the opportunity? I would like to suggest that solutions to the jobs crisis, the crisis of poverty in our communities that harm the environment, are false solutions. Our economic system is creating both problems. The same system that created the jobs crisis is creating the environmental crisis. So market-based solutions can't create a problem over here and then a solution over there. We have a track record in this state of providing, and across the country, of providing corporate tax credits. Over the summer, the state passed HB 732, over $650 million in new tax credits from 2025 to 2050 for the development of industry in the state and environmental devastation. This is undemocratic, right? We supposedly live in a democracy, but do we really have a democracy for the working class? Or do we have a dictatorship of the rich? Giving away our money for 25 years, way beyond the tenure of the people that were elected, and selling out our future out from under us to corporate power. We see this in Keystone Opportunity Zones, corporate tax breaks, the lack of progressive taxation that we have in this state. It is a fact that the wealthiest people in our state pay taxes at a much lower rate than the poorest people. So this whole question of being at the mercy of industry to create jobs is well known by folks across Pennsylvania. And I want to really call up also the Better Path Coalition, which is the environmental justice coalition in Pennsylvania that's really working closely with the Poor People's Campaign, and hope that folks can get into a relationship with each other. And I think that as you all are organizing around this, it's important to raise these questions and recognize, as you do, that these empty promises have been made before. And the question must be raised, have the kinds of tax breaks and handouts given to corporations led ultimately to less poverty or to more? Have they led to better health for our communities? Have they led to better education? Have they led to better lives? Or have they chiefly been empty promises and ways for politicians to enact the will of the ruling class by allowing them to pursue maximum profit and externalize all of the costs onto the public through contamination and through our taxes and through our wealth going to pay for what they are not paying? When civic leaders bow to this race to the bottom of every locality competing for industry and using corporate tax breaks to get people to locate in one place or another, we're simply playing into the game that we ultimately lose. Promises are broken, but by the time we have to account for what actually happened, everyone has moved on and there is no accountability. MLK in the first Poor People's Campaign talked about how when we're in an emergency, the ambulance is able to run through the stoplight or the stop sign. When you're just going about your everyday life, you have to stop at the stop sign, you have to stop at the stoplight. That's the law. But when there's an emergency, you're actually allowed to go through the light because it's an emergency situation. And we are in an emergency. We're in an emergency right now, overlapping emergencies of the pandemic, the global economic crisis, environmental devastation, the crisis of state violence, the crisis of evictions, and these are all interconnected. The pandemic has really taught us that the way that we hold together the questions of income and work are not working. This is an old paradigm, and we have to be building a vision of what is actually needed and organizing to get there. The future of work cannot be predicated on employing people to police, to incarcerate, to exploit, to pollute. These are not viable occupations. Why aren't jobs being created right now to reopen closed hospitals in the middle of a pandemic? 8 hospitals have closed in this state in the last 2 years. To supply food to people who need it, to help with educating and caring for young people. Why aren't we creating jobs to do things that our communities actually need? In the Poor People's Campaign, we're paying very close attention to the state budget. We know that because of the pandemic, the shutdown, our economy is based so much on consumer spending that we have a $5 billion budget hole coming our way in 2021. And we cannot allow them to take that from the poor and dispossessed. But we know that they'll try. So we have to be organized. And in this struggle, as in all struggles, we cannot simply make it a question of education. We cannot simply make it a question of convincing people. We actually have to organize. We have to build leaders through the process. We have to learn more about the ruling class through the process and about our class. We have to use this fight to get a greater assessment of the forces on the terrain. If we emerge from this process without more leaders that have been built, without more organization, then we'll have lost. So I just want to thank you very much for having me. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. And I want to appreciate everyone here very, very much for everything that you do. And I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Nijmie. So I'm really just going to give really 2 case studies that I'm going to delve into a little more, that are local case studies of facilities that are similar to IRG or represent or are like similar in many ways. And if I have time, I'll just quickly go over a few other case studies and kind of wrap up my points about the importance of history and lessons that we can learn. So the Tires to Energy plant represents the fossil fuel model of quote unquote recycling, using tire-derived fuel for electric power generation. In 2008, Greg Rubino chose the city of Erie to be a testing ground for the world's largest processing plant in the world. The largest tire processing plant in the world. Rubino branded the plant with language like renewable, environmentally based, and economic development, to defend the creation of 60 jobs that would process up to 100,000 tires a day and potentially power somewhere from 40 to 65,000 homes, according to Rubino and multiple sources. He founded Erie Renewable Energy and partnered with other LLCs to develop the plan. However, similar to IRG's plan, this facility would convert the scrap tire into chips for use of fuel. So other facilities and plants would need to be created and or be heavily involved to actually burn the tires into fuel. But in IRG's case, to burn the plastic as an alternative for coke and steel production. The location of this facility was just 500 yards from the Lake Erie shore, an elementary school, a racially and ethnically mixed neighborhood, 2 public housing projects, dozens of small businesses, and within a 1-mile radius of 5 public schools. In the city of Erie, IRG plans to leverage opportunity zones, which are in essence specifically allocated tax-free property purposed and placed in underutilized or abandoned areas for helping new businesses get a boost for the beginning of their development. It alleviates that initial economic burden in hopes that the business will really boom. A particular opportunity zone that IRG expressed interest in is the Joyce Savacchio Business Park, which according to the flagship Opportunity Zone website is the 2nd poorest census tract in the city, and that any community development in that park should benefit minorities and new Americans living in Erie's urban core. Where an industry plans to build is just as important as what they plan to build. Keep Erie's Environment Protected, or KEEP, was a community group created and kind of a co-collaborator with us for this event to oppose the $350 million project. Also opposed to the plant were established business leaders who voiced their concerns of such a massive facility located on the lake. Even residents in New York and Canada expressed concern. IRG's facility plans to have direct ties to our neighbors across the lake in Canada and to collect plastics from the Midwest to the Atlantic East Coast. That's that 750-mile radius. According to the DEP's air pollution permit application for this tire facility, it would have operated 24/7, 7 days a week, and emitted 76 tons more soot than Erie County's top 10 industrial, hospital, and municipal soot emitters. Despite receiving the permit, it doesn't mean that complying with those minimum standards of operations would not have adverse or long-term health effects on the surrounding communities. As was found with this plan, receiving that initial permit just gives leeway for building and operating. And then the group would have to apply for the Title V operation permits, which are far more strict and necessary for major source pollutant facilities. After about 3 years, heavy public opposition in 2011, the project moved and received approval for building in Crawford County, a county just south of Erie in Greenwood Township, and they renamed themselves Crawford Renewable Energy LLC. This technique of failing in one place and moving to another is seen not only in this case study, but with IRG as well, as Erie PA wasn't the first location that the over decade-old group wanted to build. The same design concept and language was proposed in 2014, for example, on the shores of Lake Michigan in Porter County, Indiana. Opposition remained steady still, but so did Crawford Renewable Energy's seeming success. However, in March of 2016, the group abandoned the plan, and according to Valerie Myers with the Erie Times News, the project manager cited that the fall of electricity prices due to natural gas usage, primarily from the Marcellus Shale that our state sits on, made building the plant economically unfeasible. This is an important note here because in Erie of 2018, Rubino told the community that because of natural gas prices going up, this plant was exactly what the community needed to compete. This replicates similar language to IRG in saying that while most of the recyclables needed for its facility cannot be recycled now, eventually, probably, maybe, they can be recycled in the future. But for now, we will shred them here and send them to get burned. This argumentation that the hope for sustainability equals a guarantee of sustainability is also present in this case study's plan, along with IRG's. Both facilities are calling its plant the first and largest of its kind in a closed loop system that has little to no emissions. But from a 70-page study compiled in a research course at Allegheny College in 2011, the students found that only 3 other Tier 2 energy plants existed in the US, and 2 of the 3 had enormous fines, complaints about air quality. And other studies show that the emissions were expected to be much higher than what they said that they would be. This was a nearly decade-long dispute spanning 2 counties, and in the end, the plan was never feasible. Next, I will go to the most recent example, which is the Erie Coke Plant. And I've written a lot of college essays on this, and the group called Hold Erie Coke Accountable, or HECA, that engaged in the permit and litigation process that led to the plant's closing. Erie Coke is a relevant example here because the current end goal of IRG's plan cannot feasibly be recycling all of the plastics. Rather, the current end goal is to ship the shreds across Lake Erie to Stelco and to be used as a replacement for Coke in the steel production. In 2019, the PA-DEP denied Erie Coke the Clean Air Act operating permit and Clean Water Act discharging permit, which are absolutely crucial for the facility to operate. When the DEP announced this, Erie Coke took them to court, and DEP and HECA began holding community sessions on how they monitor large-scale testing or air and water and health risks, which with, of course, the concerns and testimonies of smokestack leaks with benzene emissions, which are linked to cancer. There was a preliminary hearing that shed light on 78 unresolved violations from 2017 to 2019, which were Erie Coke's most productive years and most violations on record, with 3,000 minutes of unregulated smokestack release. Erie Coke claimed that the employees weren't trained and that they would just pay for the violations. But months went by and a judge declared they could still operate, but acknowledged that the harm in that. However, in 2019, employees were turned away at the door and the plant was closed down. Now, Erie Coke claims the funds for cleaning up the facility isn't there, despite their appeal to pay for the violation earlier. This remains a big issue because the former Tonawanda Coke plant, which closed in 2018 and was located in New York, closed after 3 decades of operating and closed to similar repeated violations. They also put off the responsibility for cleaning up their site, declaring bankruptcy and leaving a mess that still has effects on the surrounding community. With Erie Coke no longer operating, it may appear that IRG is the model for the next best thing. I'm going to brief just some examples over the past decade, and in looking at this pattern of how much money is going to be invested, what these jobs are going to look like, the location of these facilities, which often utilize opportunity zones. So there was these proposed plans, none of them happened in the city of Erie, and the Erie Coke plant closed down. But there was a $65 million fruit processing plant that was proposed, which would have been the first plant built in 15 years, and they were going to utilize the Keystone Opportunity Zone. There was a $60 million rail terminal that was proposed in Harbor Creek, but after a commission study and consulting review, it was clear the project wasn't feasible because missing from the plan was a major railroad partner and not enough demand to fill the facility. To today, still another first of its kind, $360 million pig iron plant was set to come to Erie and create 100 permanent jobs, but decided to move to Ashtabula, Ohio last year and up their investment to $500 million. This was done because this mega facility is awaiting the reconstruction and additional construction of an $86 million natural gas pipeline that was approved last year, and its completion is expected in 2021. This major gas flow is exactly what the iron ore smelting plant would need to operate for its size. And this pipeline spans from 60 miles from Crawford County to Erie to Ashtabula. But the utilization of Lake Erie was key, as the facility would have needed millions of gallons of water a day. The last brief is on the proposal of Interstate Chemical Company that was set to be built on the east side at the former hammer mill sites. It was a $62 million investment creating 40 jobs. But again, the need for natural gas was a priority. And according to their site, the facility instead is being built in Oregon, Ohio through a subsidiary called Elpont LLC and is near its completion. The facility will refine natural gas to manufacturing methanol, and the industry will be supplying locally and to Canada, as well as the Midwest. So my points again are patterns observed. These studies tell the story of industries seeking to locate in communities who need the development and expect the economic growth. The plans have models that are tied to the fossil fuel industry, and the facts about their plan, whether it's been done before or not, is that they want Erie to be a testing ground. It remains unclear and unanswerable. But there's a pattern of concerns raised by the locally engaged public, leaders, stakeholders, and these patterns are echoed also in this survey that we have created for all of you participants to take. These three patterns and concerns and priorities raised regard the economics of the plan, the human health, and the environment. Two notable economic benefits raised regard job creation and sustained, which includes the general welfare of the job, like the pay and the full-time employment benefits, while other economic benefits raised was the initial and long-term success, influence, and payoff of the plan. But as my case study showed, some facilities were rendered unfeasible before they began building, while others failed over time. Dell provided examples of the potential hidden costs for communities. So in a community that has opportunity zones, and the hidden costs for these communities could be more than they can afford. The second one is concerns raised about potential human health impacts. As Dell said, even the smallest amount of PVC breathed in by an individual has immediate effects on the body. And it is especially worrisome for vulnerable populations like young children, elderly, and that combined with COVID needs to be considered. The third and the last is really along the lines of what Sarah Bennett talked about, and the protection of air and our water. The value of Lake Erie is understood in our communities, so assuring its protection is a priority, but it doesn't mean that we can't utilize our lake for the benefit of our community. There are models for fiscally leveraging water resources, but maybe one that will hurt it is not that. But I'll end on the significance of how when you're planning for the future, it's important to talk about and reflect on history. This is so we can identify patterns or lessons learned, especially if they were costly, or replicate decisions that will bode well for our community. History lessons are important for decision makers and leaders who have significant influence over the business and operations that come into our communities. And even more so, it is local history that are critical for the public to know when trying to decide if something will benefit their future. As a young person who was an even adult for most of these case studies, I found it important to present this history to new eyes or to refresh the minds of those who have seen it before. And I expect these lessons to guide us as a public and as those who represent the public and as stakeholders to learn and take note. And these lessons will be here as a reminder. All right, so thank you, everybody. That was the presentation. Those were all that we had for the speakers. And some of you asked for the presentation so you could have the links. And Amina, could you share that in the chat right now if you haven't already?
Yeah, I can do that now.
Okay, great. And you're able to view that and click on all of those links and see all of the presentations that we presented. For those of you on Facebook, thanks for joining us. We have a survey for you. Please take it. We really want to know what you learned or how you're feeling. And we have questions that really surround the most important components of this plan. And so please answer honestly and answer fully.